Goodness, what a morning. I was just sitting down to read today's day in history when I heard a loud sound. I thought a tree branch had fallen on the roof, but then it was followed by a continuous sound. So I got up to see what it was, and something had come loose in my water heater, and there was water spewing all over the water everywhere. Holy cow. I got soaked to the skin, had to change clothes. Called the plumber, of course, gathered up my tools, which I've put away now so I can't show them to you right now, but oh mercy, went out and turned the water off at the curb, and now I'm just waiting for the plumbers to arrive. What a thing. Well, I guess I can be grateful that I live in a place where I can call plumbers and they'll come right out. Right out maybe being a relative term, we'll see. Anyway, this is October 8th, and we're going to read this day in history. And we're going to start back in 1604 when the supernova called Kepler's nova was first sighted. In 1793, American politician and first governor of Massachusetts, John Hancock, died on this day in 1793 at the age of 56. He's particularly remembered for his large and stylish signature on the United States Declaration of Independence, such that the term John Hancock has come to be a synonym for one's signature. In 1869, American politician and 14th President of the United States, Franklin Pierce, died on this date in 1869 at the age of 64. In 1871, a massive fire burns in Wisconsin. The most devastating fire in United States history ignited in Wisconsin on this day in 1871. Some 1,200 people lost their lives and 2 billion trees were consumed by flames. Despite the massive scale of this blaze, it was overshadowed by the Great Chicago Fire, which took place about 250 miles away. And so it is that in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire begins in southwest Chicago, possibly in a barn owned by Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. Fanned by strong southwesterly winds, the flames raged for more than 24 hours, eventually leveling 3.5 square miles and wiping out 1/3 of the city. Approximately 250 people were killed in this fire. 98,500 people were left homeless. 17,450 buildings were destroyed. In 1896 or 1897, I came across two separate entries from two separate sources. One said that on this day in 1896, Dow Jones starts reporting an average of selected industrial stocks, and the other source said that in 1897, journalist Charles Henry Dow, founder of the Wall Street Journal, begins charting trends of stocks and bonds. So I looked it up on Wikipedia. Both years are indicated in Dow's history, and while I wasn't able to clarify these points to my entire satisfaction, I did find it an interesting bit of news and thought you might too. In 1900, Maximilian Harden was sentenced to 6 months in prison for publishing an article critical of the German Kaiser. And this is why we have free speech in America. In 1906, Carl Ludwig Nessler first demonstrated a machine in London that put permanent waves in hair. The client wears a dozen brass curlers, each weighing 2 pounds for the 6-hour process. In 1918, U.S. soldier Alvin York displays heroics at Argonne. On this day in 1918, United States Corporal Alvin C. York reportedly killed over 20 German soldiers and captured an additional 132 at the head of a small detachment in the Argonne forest near the Meuse River in France. The exploits later earned York the Congressional Medal of Honor. He had applied for conscientious objector status, but was denied that, making the following diary entry all the more meaningful. York wrote in his diary that those machine guns were spitting fire and cutting down the undergrowth all around me, something awful. I didn't have time to dodge behind a tree or dive into the brush. I didn't even have time to kneel or lie down. As soon as the machine guns opened fire on me, I began to exchange shots with them. In order to sight me or to swing their machine guns on me, the Germans had to show their heads above the trench. and every time I saw a head, I just touched it off. All the time I kept yelling at them to come down. I didn't want to kill any more than I had to, but it was they or I, and I was giving them the best I had. Several other American soldiers followed York's lead and began firing. As they drew closer to the machine gun nest, the German commander, thinking he had underestimated the size of the Army squadron, surrendered his garrison of some 90 men. On the way back to the Allied lines, York and his squad took more prisoners, for a total of 132. Though Alvin York consistently played down his accomplishments of that day, he was given credit for killing more than 20 German soldiers. Promoted to the rank of sergeant, he remained on the front lines until November 1, 10 days before the armistice. In April 1919, York was awarded the highest American military decoration, the Medal of Honor. In 1919, on this day, the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives passed the Volstead Prohibition Enforcement Bill. This is the famous or infamous Prohibition Bill that we've heard about. 1919, the world's first transcontinental air race. 63 airplanes, 15 from San Francisco and 48 from New York, took part in this 5,400-mile round-trip race. The winner, Lieutenant Belvin Maynard, took 3 days and 21 hours to return to New York. In 1921, the first live radio broadcast of a football game. Harold W. Arlen was the announcer when KDKA of Pittsburgh announced live from Forbes Field as the University of Pittsburgh beat West Virginia University 21-13. In 1935, Ozzie Nelson married Harriet Hilliard. This is Ozzie and Harriet. You may have heard of them. In 1939, Nazi Germany annexes western Poland. In 1941, Jessie Jackson, civil rights leader, was born. In 1943, Chevy Chase, actor, comedian known for his roles on Saturday Night Live TV series and comedic movies, was born on this date in Manhattan, New York. In 1944, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet debuted on CBS Radio. Happy anniversary, Ozzie and Harriet. In 1948, the world's first internal pacemaker was implanted. A 43-year-old man named Arne Larsson was the recipient of the pacemaker, which worked only for a few hours. However, Larsson lived long after the pacemaker stopped working. He died in 2001 at the age of 86. In 1949, American actress Susan Alexandra Sigourney Weaver was born in Manhattan, New York. In 1956, Don Larson of the New York Yankees pitches the first perfect game in Major League Baseball World Series, the only no-hitter game against the Brooklyn Dodgers in the history of the World Series. And in 1957, the Brooklyn Dodgers announced their move to Los Angeles. In 1957, Jerry Lee Lewis records Great Balls of Fire in Memphis, Tennessee. Jerry Lee Lewis was not the only early rock and roller from a strict Christian background who struggled to reconcile his religious beliefs with the moral implications of the music he created. He may have been the only one to have one of his religious crises caught on tape, however, in between takes on one of his legendary hit songs. It was on October 8, 1957, that Bible school dropout Jerry Lee Lewis laid down the definitive version of Great Balls of Fire amidst a losing battle with his conscience and the legendary Sam Phillips, head of Sun Records. It was hours into the Great Balls of Fire session when Jerry Lee began arguing with Sam Phillips that the song was too sinful for him to record. As the two talked loudly over each other, Phillips pleaded with Lewis to believe that his music could actually be a force for moral good. At the time of this recording, Mr. Lewis is still alive at the age of 84. In 1967, Che Guevara was defeated. A Bolivian guerrilla force led by Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara was defeated in a skirmish with Special Detachment of the Bolivian Army. Guevara was wounded, captured, and executed the next day. In 1970, communists reject Nixon's peace proposal. Also in 1970, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn wins the Nobel Prize in Literature. The best-known living Russian writer, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, wins the Nobel Prize for Literature. Born in 1918 in the Soviet Union, Solzhenitsyn was a leading writer and critic of Soviet internal oppression. Arrested in 1945 for criticizing the Stalin regime, he served 8 years in Russian prisons and labor camps. Upon his release in 1953, he was sent into internal exile in Asiatic Russia. After Stalin's death, Solzhenitsyn was released from his exile and began writing in earnest. I really mean it now. His first publication, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, 1963, appeared in the somewhat less repressive atmosphere of Nikita Khrushchev's regime. The book was widely read in both Russia and the West, and its harsh criticisms of Stalinist repression provided a dramatic insight into the Soviet system. He died in Moscow in 2008 at the age of 89. In 1971, John Lennon released his mega-hit Imagine. In 1982, the musical Cats began a run of nearly 18 years on Broadway. In 2001, the Office of Homeland Security is founded. The Office of Homeland Security was founded on this day in 2001, less than 1 month after the September 11 terrorist attacks. Now a cabinet department, Homeland Security is now one of the largest organs of the federal government, charged with preventing terror attacks, border security, immigrations and customs, disaster relief and prevention, and other related tasks. 2009, self-help guru's sweat lodge ceremony turns deadly. On this day in 2009, 2 people died and more than a dozen others were hospitalized following a sweat lodge ceremony gone bad at a retreat run by motivational speaker and author James Arthur Ray near Sedona, Arizona. A third participant in the ceremony died 9 days later. A jury in Camp Verde, Arizona ultimately found Ray guilty of 3 counts of negligent homicide and sentenced him to 3 two-year prison terms to run concurrently and ordered him to pay some $57,000 in restitution to the victims' families. In 2014, the first person in U.S. diagnosed with Ebola dies. On this day in 2014, Thomas Eric Duncan, the first person diagnosed with a case of Ebola virus disease in the U.S., died at age 42 in the Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas. Shortly before his death, Duncan, who lived in Liberia, had traveled to America from West Africa, which was in the throes of the largest outbreak of the often fatal disease since its discovery in 1976. After Duncan passed away, 2 nurses who had cared for him at the Dallas hospital contracted Ebola. However, both recovered. And that's going to wrap it up for us today on this day in history for October 8. And what a busy day it was, and what a busy day it is for yours truly. Thanks for watching. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes, along with a physical address if you'd like to send along a coffee mug. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And feel free to share if you found this video interesting or informative. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. On October, okay, with the notifications. Oh boy, we got our years mixed up. Oh, dang it. I forgot to put his name in there. PA. Why do I always say it that way?